What is conservatism? Do young people need it? And what the hell can we learn from it? Today, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Incite on this beautiful Sunday morning. Today we are joined by the man, myth, the legend, Steve Gomez. Do you want to say some words?
Yeah, hi everybody. Again, another fantastic Sunday morning with Rory in his bedroom. This time he's not wearing a onesie, which is really cool. It's put me slightly at ease. So I've had a haircut, as you can probably see, and Rory has had one as well. But mine is kind of like beginning to thin, which has got nothing to do with me, whereas he's chosen to have his thin.
Always.
Looks good. Always
yeah,
looks good.
I keep it very short.
Yeah, you know, when I was a kid, I was always scared of skinheads, actually. You look like a skinhead. Now I'm sitting next to one and I can't believe it. I'm talking to a skinhead. Bloody hell.
Yeah, I actually got it a bit long, to be honest, right now.
Yeah, it's looking a bit long, Rory.
I was going to shave it before we start.
No, it's all right. It looks good. It looks good.
Fresh
I love the Buddhist monk look, actually.
Yeah,
I prefer, rather than skinhead, I think Buddhist monk.
Yeah, I do love the monk look. It does look amazing. Well, thank you for everyone tuning in again. Thank you so much. I mean, blimey, the support on episode 1. I cannot believe how many people tuned in. Just a massive thank you, because I launched the new show and I thought a few people tune in, a few kind of dedicated souls out there who love the show, love what we're doing. And the response was, I can't even tell you how much better it was than I expected. I cannot believe that. So thank you for everyone who shared the episode, because people were sharing it about. That is how this thing grows. So a massive thank you, and thank you all for being here. But today we're going to be talking about conservatism, because it's something that I think younger people can learn a lot from, because we're in a generation where we have uprooted all traditions, all time before us, things that came before us, things that were valued, that were seen as moral, as good, as virtuous, as loving, as from how we walked, talk, do things by ourselves, live our moral purpose, a endless plethora of things to do with conservatism. And I think as someone who's older, we can learn a lot from it. So should we start off by actually talking about what is conservatism?
Yeah, very much so. Conservatism, I was having a problem pronouncing it. It's really bizarre. Conservatism is, I'll use the analogy of, the French word conserve. Okay, a conserve is a jam, and it's called conserve because you put fruit and you make a jam with sugar, and the sugar stops it rotting. And I thought it was quite an interesting analogy, actually. The word conserve in French to refer to jam, which is fruit not rotting. It lasts and tastes nice. It's sweet. It's a sweet thing, and I think the most important thing about it is there's no rot. It's not rotting. So generally speaking, we have, as I was talking about the use of words last time, and one thing I'm really concerned about is how words get abused and get twisted. The word anarchy, for example, has been twisted to mean chaos and rioting in the streets when it doesn't mean that at all. Anarchy is a word that is the opposite to monarchy, where you have one leader. Anarchy is a lot of leaders. In fact, we become leaders of ourselves and others. So that's one word that's been, brutalized. And the word conservative, again, has been almost used as a swear word. It's become a dirty word. And, it's embarrassing, the number of people who support the Labour Party, which, I had a begrudging respect for the Labour Party. It was the trade unions that started this amazing movement, which gave us the freedoms that we have and, built sort of rights for the workers against the, the corporate hegemony, which is constantly trying to pay you as little as possible and make as much profit. And so, the Labour Party had a great and illustrious history of looking after the small man, the working class. And it's now turned into a rabble of progressive weirdos, if I can say that, because when you look at the kind of language they use, the language they use in regard to Tories, kill a Tory, punch a Tory, hate Conservatives, it's really embarrassing. And if you ask them what is a conservative, I think most of them will say, "Oh, someone who supported Maggie Thatcher, or someone who likes Boris Johnson,
or someone who loves money." That's a common one.
Oh, is it? Is that what they say?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And Tony Blair and his cronies and the Labour Party don't love money. Why does Keir Starmer cozy up to all the bankers then? Because he wants the finance. Again, it's politics, and I'm going to try and steer clear of politics. Otherwise, we'll get into another area of difficulties. What worries me about the fact that people have this anti-conservative approach is they're missing a gem. They really are. And a conservative approach is a approach which is thought out, careful. If you're a conservative in your thinking, that means you're not hesitant, but you are someone who takes your time about something. And I think the opposite to conservatism is progressivism. Progressivism. And, the progressives are people who are desperate to try something out new. They want to try out a new way of behaving. And again, we're seeing that with the Liberals and the Labour Party. Whereas the conservative approach is to look at the past, learn from the past, and project gently towards the future while maintaining that received wisdom that one has, and trying to gently move forward without rushing forward and trying new ideas and getting it wrong and causing pain and hardship for everybody. I use the village concept, the concept of living in a conurbation and living in a village. So why did people live in villages? Why was that? Because, from the start of human history, people tended to live in small communities around each other. And they had a common meeting area, which would be, the town hall or the village hall. And then everybody would live around that. And that is received wisdom. It's a good way to live. Everybody's, connected, but not too connected. Okay, and then the progressives came along and they decided that instead of having people living around, they'd build tower blocks and they'd build a new progressive way of living. Le Corbusier, the famous architect, is probably the most destructive individual I've ever come across in regard to how he converted the way we lived. And the conservative approach would be a traditional approach. I'm using the village as an example, as opposed to trying to find a new way and then wondering why there's suicides happening, why people are depressed, why the living standards are so awful. It's because you've moved away from the traditional, what I would say, received wisdom, that ancient wisdom that comes with just knowing. And for me, that's what a conservative is. It is a traditional approach to the world and taking a considered approach on how one does things. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Is that a good explanation?
Yeah, I think that's a very good explanation of what conservatism is. In a way, its goal is to conserve.
Yeah.
Because it's conservatism and it's not about uprooting things. It's about progressing in a slow but moderate pace and learning from the past. And younger people now, it's like, we know better, let's uproot everything. And that has massive consequences. And there is a time and place where that can be beneficial, but you also got to look at, is it beneficial, and what are the results of people uprooting things? And we're seeing that's clearly not a positive. I mean, by any metrics, that's not a positive. I mean, about what you said about progressivism, I'd get what you mean. I think there is a good place for progressivism.
Yeah.
And for radical change to happen, there needs to be a radical progression of things. It can't be conserved always. How would you balance kind of progressivism with conservatism in a society of making progress, of developing innovation, prospects, future? How would you how would you do that?
Yeah, actually, funny enough, the thing that pops into my head is the prodigal son. And we'll bring that because that's a juxtaposition, if I can use that term, of a progressive approach or a reckless approach. And I'm not saying progressiveness is reckless, but it has a tendency to be reckless. It's the kind of person who would say to his dad, look, you don't know what you're bloody talking about. This is the way you've got to do it. There's a lovely old story about the young bull and the old bull, and they see a field of cows, Actually, I'm not going to go that way. I'm not going to tell that story because a lot of people are going to start telling me off about that. But bottom line is, progressivism tends to be the domain of the younger person. Okay, so I think it's good to be progressive when you're younger, to look at new ideas, look at new ways of doing things, trying to turn things upside down. Now, I think what's happened, though, is that's been turned on its head. And I'm thinking that a lot of the older people now are the ones that are being progressive. And I think a lot of your age group, in some respects, have a bit of a conservative approach. I may be wrong, but I'm just beginning to see...
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think there is a significant number of sort of middle-aged people who I suppose have grown up and maybe have not grown up, have had this kind of rebellious, progressive approach bred into them because they feel that, if you behave in a conservative manner, you're not hip, you're not with it, you're not credible. And I think that I'm seeing a lot of that in an older community where you think people should know better. Okay. Now, the whole point about knowing better is it's not, I don't know better than you, Rory, in many areas. The difference between you and me is that I've spent longer on this planet going through more shit, making more mistakes. And because I've learned from those mistakes, rather than saying to you, don't learn from your mistakes, don't listen to me, go ahead and make the mistakes. If I can tell you a quicker way or better way of doing things without making the mistakes, then that's a good thing, isn't it? And that actually brings me to what progressiveness is. Progressiveness is trying something new, okay, which is great. I'm not knocking that. But what I'm saying is that if you go helter-skelter to try something new, which ultimately doesn't work. Let's take, for example, I'm going to be quite challenging. Okay, I'm going to say this whole concept of sexualizations, the sexual revolution that's happened over the last few years, where I would say the Labour Party and the Liberal Party have pushed this concept of transgenderism. Okay, and
should we keep it? Let's keep it on. And is a very good thing to talk about progressivism, dismantling of words, meaning. But let's do it more relatable, something everyone like. Let's talk about the sexualization of our culture with actual sex.
Okay. I mean, the point I was going to make was that there was this concept which was alien to a lot of us has been pushed upon us. Okay, but let's keep it. Let's keep it conservative, shall we? Let's not go too far. But the sexualization of our culture is one area where things seriously have gone awry, in my opinion. Now, I kind of grew up in the kind of crazy 80s, where the sort of sexual freedom of the 60s, the pill, which meant that you could have sex without repercussions, without consequences, really, I think, matured in the 70s and 80s. And there was this kind of like culture of not free sex, but it was very sexualized. But rather than it correcting itself, I'm really concerned that there is an element within our society that has decided that it is a money spinner to sexualize everything. We now have Pornhub, and all that pornography. And, I see young girls, all older men, all older women will say, "Oh my God, look how short her skirt is." And yes, in the 60s and 70s, mini skirts, everyone was tutting about that. But there is a reason people tut about that. Okay, there is a reason why, when you behave a certain way, older people, generally speaking, will naturally shy away from it or say something negative about it, because they know the consequences of behaving a certain way. And if you were to dress in a way which is provocative, what kind of person are you attracting to yourself? You might think you look beautiful, you might think you look very attractive, and you probably do. You look amazing. But yet, what messages are you giving out? And this is a classic example. So younger girls like to try and push the boundary. So, I remember at school, the girls used to hoist their skirts up. I went to a school where it was very strict. The girls had to have their skirts below their knees. Generally speaking, girls need to have their skirts before their knees. And then as soon as they come out of school, they hoist their skirts up to show a bit of leg. Now, obviously, this is sounding really kind of old-fashioned, and I hate to say, I don't approve of that kind of thing, and I love for people to wear fashionable, attractive. But when attractive becomes sexy, if someone says, "Do I look sexy in this?" What kind of answer are you going to give? What are they asking if they say, "Do I look sexy?" Or if someone says you look sexy in something? So I think using this conversation to try and look at a conservative approach. So I'll tell you a funny story. I was at a party. Must be about 20 years ago. Somewhere in Catford, funnily enough, and there was a bunch. There was boys and girls, obviously, in a party. We're all having a drink, and it's in a lovely bar. Someone's 30th birthday or whatever it was, and the girls generally were wearing skimpy little black numbers, which is the trend at that time. Short little skirts. In fact, I had a girlfriend who once turned up, and I was taking her out for dinner, and I said, "Are you going to go like that?" Because she wasn't changed, and she wasn't looking particularly glamorous for where we were going. And she said, "Oh, don't worry." She pulled out this tiny little black dress from a handbag. She said, "Don't worry, I'm going to get changed into this." I said, "How the hell are you going to fit into that?" Sure enough, she goes into the loo, comes back, she looks $1 million in this tiny little black dress. Quite amazing. But the point I want to make is, at this party, there were a lot of girls dressed like this, and in walked a girl wearing a sort of very demure and conservative Laura Ashley dress. Okay, I don't know if you know what Laura Ashley. No. Laura Ashley was a very popular women's outfitters clothing for, and it was kind of sort of old-fashioned style clothes, very traditional style of clothing. You can imagine, floral dresses, that kind of thing. And she walked in, and it was amazing. Every guy turned and looked at her. Okay, and what that said to me was that what men find attractive isn't sexiness, but femininity. Okay, and the problem with our society is that we are almost now being corrupted into thinking that a woman who displays her body, the more flesh of her body is more attractive. Was it Miley Cyrus who appeared at the Grammys or some event wearing a dress made out of safety pins?
Was that recently?
Yeah, I saw something.
Was it Billie Eilish?
I don't know. I can't remember who it was. It's someone. Anyway, and literally didn't leave anything to the imagination. She was basically naked with a little thin covering over her. And okay, there's a time and a place for it. And I'm sounding like an old fogey. This is the problem. You sound like an old fogey if you say things like that. But there is a reason why. And I mean, I've got a pet hate. I've got a pet hate when it's freezing cold and I see girls walking along without coats. Okay. For me, the most attractive is a woman wearing a really lovely coat, which she can take off when she's comfortable, and what she's wearing underneath is absolutely fine. But wearing a coat shows you've thought, about the inclement weather, and that you're not going to sit there freezing away. And I know it's difficult when you go somewhere and you hang coats up, you have to hang coats up and all that kind of stuff. Oh God, I'm really sounding like an old fogey.
No. I think so there'll be people who listen to what you've said and they'll go, "Wow, that's sexist." Well, I don't know that many people who say it, but they would say they would say "Oh well, it's women's liberation," and there is a new form of what is liberation for a woman. And I think what you said about progressivism and conservatism is interesting, because what used to be progressivism, which was the not objectifying woman, the male gaze, stuff like that used to be a progressive take on a critique of sexualization, but now it's inverted, and to be anti-sexualization is now conservatism, and to be pro-sexualization is almost the progressive view. So for someone to view like what you said about people wearing very small bits of clothing, that used to be kind of, I'm butchering what I'm saying here, but there's a new brand of what it means to be a woman, in the sense of progressive, because there's a conflict between the old wave of feminism, which is for women, feminism in the sense of women being treated as human beings, but now there's this new wave which is almost we need to conquer the objectification of women, which means that they almost will embrace objectification for their own benefit. And it's very interesting, because the truth is that modern progressivism is one of the most detrimental things to both sexes in so many ways, but it also means that men are actually left off the hook more. And we can link that to a lot of things like abortion, hookup culture and stuff. But it's interesting because, like on our last episode, we spoke about individualism. That is also part of what we're talking about today, which is conservatism. Because when the individual is the god, the community becomes a secondary thing, and therefore, why not wear a skimpy bit of clothing? Because you're not going to think about how that will affect someone else's relationship, for instance, how that will affect the overall view of other women, giving them pressure to dress a certain way that maybe they feel uncomfortable to do. How that will affect, well, their own relationship. How will the man feel in the relationship if his brother's like...
So I mean, I'm going to try and encapsulate what you're saying because I want to try and understand it. And I think what you're saying is that in order to show that you are a liberated woman, it is your right to dress a way that you feel.
Well, I'm not saying it because I'm not a woman, but I'm saying these are the arguments by modern feminists now that you are, and I'm not a scholar in feminism and I'm not a woman, so if you're a woman out there, correct me, email me, radicalenglishgentleman@gmail.com. But from what I gather, the conversation I have, it's inverting where to embrace sexualization, whether that be prostitution, OnlyFans, that is now seen as a new brand of what it means to be an empowered woman. And I would argue, and so would old school feminists who I follow, some brilliant, really brilliant feminists I follow, who say that is not empowering.
No, of course.
But the modern brand of feminism, that is empowering. It is empowering to sleep around. It is empowering to sell your body. It is empowering to dress very promiscuously. It's very empowering to show your body off, because it's like their view is they're reclaiming their sexuality. But to keep on kind of conservatism on that brand of things, part of it is the uproot of past traditions. So when my grand grew up, yes, there was sexism, but there was also a lot of decorum for other people in society. So people were looked down upon who dressed a certain way or did certain things because they were conserving a certain amount of elegance. But my generation seemed to think that they know better, and that right there is what modern young people view conservatism. It's I know better. It's I'll disrespect you. You're an older person. You've lived more. You've experienced more. But I know better. There's this almost inclination of like we know better, and this happens with every generation. I'm not saying it's unique to my generation, but we're seeing it to massive degrees. The disrespect for older generations, and you even see it with people like grandmas or grannies that the grandma might be racist or sexist or whatever, and they're like, oh, you know, and you see these posts where people are, oh, I just walked out of Christmas dinner because my gran was racist or whatever, and it's like you're a scumbag. You're not a saint, and we're seeing this just disrespect, and it's arrogance. It's pure arrogance, because to really think that thousands of years, these things that have made society function, like marriage, like monogamy, and we're just going Christianity, that all of a sudden young people, oh, this random guy has just he's sorted it, mate. I mean, come on, you got to be next level up yourself to really think that you can just dismantle institutions. And that is kind of the thesis of conservatism, of I know better, that I can uproot so much before me. And to anyone who believes that, like, they generally do believe that, but part of them believes that they know better. And that's why I think reading books or famous bits of music, or I think that's a very important thing too. And I'm a lot more in touch with it now, because I used to dismiss kind of old literature a bit more, and now I appreciate it more because I realise the power of that. Maybe that be a Bible story, Proverbs. I mean, Proverbs, what it says in there.
How powerful isn't that?
Yeah.
I mean, Proverbs, funny enough, you know, Proverbs, if you, and I would commend anybody, whatever background or lifestyle you have, I would highly recommend that you read Proverbs and then read Psalms. Psalms are prayers, which are still very powerful, but Proverbs, I think, is the basis of wisdom. And God talks about seeking wisdom. And if you really want to seek wisdom, then I would suggest read Proverbs. And what you would find in Proverbs is a very conservative approach to life, and very regulated and thought out approach. Funnily enough, I was watching something recently which talked about how even in the Bible it says, you know, for the right, about the right and the left, and how the righteous. I'll try and find it for you next time. But it's the right is about conservatism and actually physical right, and the physical left. Did you know that the word for left in Latin is sinister? Wow. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. No. So, and the reason for that, I think, was that people who wrote with their left hand were regarded as sinister, which is just a little point that I wanted to bring up. But there is, and I'll find that passage which explains, actually in the Bible it talks about this right and left, and again we are talking about the right being conservative and the left being Labour or liberal minded. You make a really interesting observation about how young people, and see, this is the problem. When I start to categorize young people, I don't really want to have to say things like, well, you're getting it wrong or you're wrong. It's you guys, you've got to live your life and you've got to learn. But the wisdom, a wise person would refer to another. Now, for many years, I was determined to do things on my own, okay? And I cocked up on a regular basis because I thought I knew, but I didn't. And then once I was able to swallow that pride and say, actually, I need to ask people and get an opinion and speak to people, then I actually found that I was more successful. Funny enough, when we were just walking up, I saw a book by Dale Carnegie, How to Make Friends and Influence People. Okay. And if anybody's... Have you heard of that book?
No.
You've never heard of...
Maybe I've heard. I probably have heard.
It's on your bookshelf, mate.
Is it? My bookshelf there?
Yeah. No, downstairs when we were walking up. I glanced at it as I walked up. So I would highly recommend, as well as Proverbs, it is the #1 selling book in history.
What, the Bible?
No, apart from the Bible, second to the Bible, I think.
Really?
Yeah. Dale Carnegie, How to Make Friends and Influence People, is a #1 bestseller.
Is it?
Yeah. And for years, I thought, I'm not going to read that because I know better. Yeah, of course I know better. We all know better, don't we? And it's called I use this term, the arrogance of ignorance. It's amazing how when you're ignorant, you can afford to be arrogant.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, the more you know, the less you know.
Yeah, no, so the famous phrase, the more you know, the more you realise how little you know.
Exactly.
Absolutely phenomenal. And also a great other phrase. My mum says, she said, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Do you know what? Can I just say right now, and I'm guilty of this as well, because we have the internet, because we can Google everything and we can find out information. So all of a sudden, you've got experts who've read something on Google, and I can fall into that category. We've all done it, So you say to people, well, how do you know this? Well, I Googled it. It's like, well, does that make you an authority? The word authority, for example, I've got a friend of mine who's never done sales or really, on a very low level, but he decided to write a book on sales. Okay. And he spent ages, and it's quite a good book. He's put lots of examples, but he's not got any real experience of this. And the word author, if you think about it, means authority. It's a short word. The author is the authority on that subject. So someone would write a book because they were an authority. So who was the authority on that book? The author. It was kind of taken from that word. And so the problem we've got at the moment is that people speak with authority but no knowledge. And so you can hear people talk and they sound extremely cogent, and you're thinking to yourself, wow, they know what they're talking about. But they don't. In many cases, it's all camouflage. And because we live in a world of sound bites and very quick information download, small data sets, we don't dig any deeper. And if ever you look at old books and read some of the old literature, if you get a chance to find an old book, start reading it. The language is exquisite. It's very thought out and semantically beautiful. But we don't have that anymore. It's all this kind of, how can I put it? Just sort of, for the moment, try to grab the attention of the person by using the most explicit language you can, or however. So again, we're talking about a conservative approach or a radical approach, a liberal approach, and what worries me at the moment is that a lot of people who should know better, which is what I was saying earlier on, which is why I think I'm seeing younger people. I'm talking to some younger people, and I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, he had a punk rock band. It had a disgusting name. I'm not even going to just tell you what the name of the punk band was. It was something. It was pretty grim. Anyway, so he was a kind of crazy guy, and he'd led a very colourful life, similar age to myself, and lived in the 80s, and and he was telling me, and he said he was chatting to his son, who's about your age, okay, and he said he was boasting to his son how many conquests he'd had in his life.
Bloody hell.
Okay, and he was like trying to big. He was and he was telling me the story, and he said his son looked at him, he said, "Dad, aren't you a bit embarrassed about that?"
Wow, that's wild.
And he gulped. He literally was like, "Oh." Instead of the son going, "Oh wow, Dad, you're such a man," his son looked at him and said, "Aren't you a bit embarrassed about that kind of behaviour?" And he was telling me, he said he was really shocked, and he said, "My goodness, these kids are more conservative,"
Wow.
and so that's why I was saying what I was saying, because whilst we want to believe that the young are radical and not conservative, I think that what has happened, because you guys are faced with more temptation than we were. Literally, you've got phones, and it's so simple for you to just go on and watch Pornhub, to go on and hook up, to watch whatever you want. Whatever you want. If you want to watch something disgusting, you can watch it, and it's at your fingertips, okay? So therefore, what I think is happening, and this is just my theory, is that when you're faced with an abundance, let's say, for example, you've got an addiction to food, all right? And if you've got people who've always had a lot of food around them, then they become quite picky, because they've learned that if you go and eat everything, you're just going to make yourself sick. And I'm really hoping that because of this smorgasbord of vulgar things that are on display, and you can have whatever you want, what has happened is that your generation, I'm hoping, is now thinking, I can do that, but I'm going to restrict myself because I know it's not good for me to do this. So I don't know. That's what I'm hoping. Are you seeing something similar? Have you noticed a sort of conservative? I mean, because to be honest, Rory, we spent time together chatting, and I'm, just so proud of some of the things you say to me.
Thanks.
No, seriously, and I mean, I'm sure there's lots of young guys like you who are determined to live a good life and who don't want to be, the proverbial arsehole and behave in a way that is disrespectful. And I honestly have hope. I really have hope, because I think you guys just have such a horrible time. I was thinking when I went to parties and we behaved in crazy, silly ways, we didn't have the risk of anybody filming us. You didn't have that risk, and yet you guys are open to that.
But also within that, I think it's interesting because when you did that, that was more counterculture, because there were more conventions and conservative values in society. So it was almost like a more of a growth trajectory, like you go through the phases or you're younger. And that's not to endorse or justify people's actions, but it's to say that there was people who learnt from their mistakes, and overall there was almost like a conservative beacon that people were heading towards as it progressed in life. But now there isn't that beacon anymore. There's it goes on and on and on, but then where? And that's why we see, I always bring it up, but population collapse, record amount of women of those who having kids, record, loneliness, depression, suicide, because what has our generation inherited? Our national identity. We're told we're racist, we should hate ourselves. That's kind of the mainstream young sexuality. Oh, it's fluid. Oh, just have fun, have sex with loads of people. Sex means nothing. Abortion is fine. Oh, it's actually empowering for women. What it is to be a young person, what we have inherited is nothing, and we're actively disrespecting people who have learned and who have lived, like people in your generation. We're told to almost be and not to be too hard. We are I hear people almost brag sometimes about disrespect for older people just because of certain views from a different. We're told almost that's like a noble thing to do. So for young people, it's there isn't really a uptick trajectory to something good, because that hasn't really been formed yet, and it's only going inverse. And we always speak about it, when will the kind of the pendulum swing the other way?
Yeah.
And I think what you say, there is hope, because when things are so extreme and terrible as they are, there's a subset of people who are like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And I see it like in church, like there's young people out there who are like, this is terrible, this is awful. And there's people of a different breed of mindset to my generation, but that's only a small amount of people. And for a lot of people, they don't have that and they don't know about it. And that's one of the reasons my podcast, I feel, so important, because I know that there'll be people listening who'll be like, oh wait, it's okay to think that hooking up with loads of people is a immoral act, or it's okay to think that killing babies is a bad thing. You know, just basic biological things that everyone knows are true, but they're scared to say. I think that there is hope in that respect, but I can't even remember.
Well, I mean, the point that you've made me think about is how, you know, every generation, the younger generation has tried to push against the older generation. You know, I was telling you about how when I was growing up, it was counterculture. We were growing up with a very constrained situation where our parents really did their own thing, and we were left to get on with our lives. And you know, part of that culture also bred the punks. You know, and the punk revolution was one of the most amazing things that ever happened. And I don't think your generation could understand the impact of a bloke standing in a street with tiny, skinny trousers, ripped and torn, with a massive green mohawk, you know, and just looking like a complete, you know, bizarre crazy, because we were all conditioned that kind of behaviour was wrong. And the counterculture was very powerful. It hit at the establishment, and we were trying to they were trying to destable the establishment. The funny thing is, you know, anarchy in the UK, Sex Pistols, you know, all of that kind of groundwork was to try and destabilise a culture which was rotten. And at the time, I couldn't see that. I couldn't see how rotten the culture that had developed. It was very constrained. It was very compliant. And this is where I kind of slightly go off the track, because, you know, if we are traditional and we only do things because it's traditional to do so, you have to question. And this is why the good thing about progressive is, because if you just take for granted, for example, that's what's happening at the moment, that the government and politicians are good people and they always will do things for the benefit of the people, and you have that mindset, which is what the majority of people in Britain who watch the BBC, they're compliant, you know, obedient, and we've reached the point now where if the government says something, we all agree, they're right. Yeah. And what we do need to do now is to kick back from that. But that was happening. You know, was it Johnny Rotten, he called out Jimmy Savile. He called out the BBC and he called out Jimmy Savile at that point. But because he was a person of ridicule and the media had made him ridiculous, no one listened to him. And he was, right at the beginning, he was calling out Jimmy Savile and saying this man is a violent paedophile. And what I'm trying to say is that whilst conservatism is good from the point of view that it should be about, you know, a thoughtful approach to something, the problem with conservatism and traditionalism is if you start doing things just purely because it's traditional and it's not challenged, that can lead to where we are now. And so I think what has happened...
That's a really good point.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think in some respects, and also what's happened is it's been pushed... Yes, but then again, also the progressive side has pushed almost too much. Okay, and it's taking people to the situation where I'm going to mention the whole concept of transgenderism, because I think it's abhorrent to a lot of people, but yet we're being told it is. Now, I haven't got a problem if someone needs to express themselves in a different way to the sex they were born with, to the gender they were born with. I haven't got a problem with that. But I think the way it is being dealt with at the moment, as well as a lot of things that were wrong in the past were regarded as wrong. For example, homosexuals are very badly treated. People of other persuasions, sexual persuasions, were treated terribly. And I think that is something that we need to reconsider.
And that's a good aspect of progressivism. And there's great things: women's right to vote, anti-segregation laws, like right to own property, homosexual being able to love someone, two consents in adults. There's good progressive things. But sorry to interrupt, but the bottom line is, what is progressivism is change. So what used to be progressivism, which was social justice in a good sense of real social justice, real change, is now not. It's degeneracy. It's the fall of Rome. It's not progressivism.
Decadence. Yeah, and we're seeing this now. And in actual fact, there's a lot of parallels being drawn with the fall of Rome, the decadence in Rome. And one of the things they said was, when one of the similarities between the decadent fall of Rome times and now it was bizarre, but sports people, gladiators, were paid ridiculous amounts of money, as were chefs. And even in Rome that happened, and now we're seeing that happening here. But again, it's that depravity. When a culture reaches a point where the moral boundaries are pushed to the point where even the most progressive start to wince, then I think we've gone too far.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm hoping that your generation and the generation that's coming up is going to push the pendulum back. I think that naturally happens.
There has to be a point. And it's going on and on and on. When will that go? And it'll be interesting to see how the reaction is. Is it going to be this puritanical nutcase? Who knows? And I don't know how long that's actually going to take, because we're seeing now younger men growing up today now becoming more kind of anti-feminist, because what feminism used to mean is completely different. And then you also got Andrew Tate, so it's difficult to really decipher the credibility of that. But you're going to see like young men are becoming more and more conservative, but women are becoming more and more liberal. So there is also a disconnect between the sexes, and what is that going to mean for values of marriage? And it's difficult for both sides, because if you're a young girl growing up, it's like, well, what do you believe? You're told it's empowering for me to do this, but at the same time, you might have an instinct that that's wrong, and then that's kind of natural oppression to yourself. So you have to almost like go against yourself, go with society, but then you're questioning that at the same time. And for men as well, it's like what am I meant to do? Am I meant to be like super feminine and do that
toxic masculinity?
Yeah, like,
what was that term that was used? Toxic masculinity.
Yeah, like what? Like how do I fit my role in society? And I think this is also a broader sense of conservatism, of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, of how. So, for instance, in many cultures, when you become a man, when you become a woman, there's a ritual, there's a symbolic thing that happens, and that is conservatism. It's conserving a precious act that is passed down from generations, and then it is done to future generations because it is acknowledged and agreed upon that this is a good, influential steering to someone's life. However, we don't have any of that. Like, we have some guy on Instagram saying to be tough, or we have some woman on Instagram saying do this. There's like, and this is the aspect where I understand why people act in the way they are, and it's individualism, but it's also the information. It's like, where do you even begin?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Andrew Tate, actually, because he's been quite challenging for a lot of people. I know at some schools they've actually banned people from listening. They've tried to ban and told parents that parents should stop their children listening to Andrew Tate. I think Andrew Tate was a reaction to extreme feminism and this whole kind of trying to corrupt masculinity into something bad. And I think he came back at that. And a lot of young guys who were struggling with this kind of behaviour and who were being told that being a man was a bad thing, he corrected that. Personally, I think he might have gone a bit too far with some of the stuff he said.
Yeah, I think about Tate, I think his reaction is he's filling a vacuum of hatred of men, of men are naturally oppressing, of men are dominating, and then men are like, hang on, no, we're not. And then he's saying that. So, and it's an easy go out for men. But the issue with Andrew Tate is, I would argue, he's one of the most progressive people there is, in a sense, this is because he's the embodiment of wokeness. He's the ultimate individual. One of the key crux of what Andrew Tate says is about acquiring wealth, acquiring girls, acquiring materialism, of like living a mundane, vapid life where you give into temptations. Well, like keeping yourself in shape, but the only reason you're doing that is for the individual, and that is wokeness. That is progressivism. It's all about individualism. So when people talk about Andrew Tate as some sort of, traditional, he's making all these men so traditional, it's like, no, he's not. He's the embodiment of progressivism and wokeism. He's the inversion, because he's not. What is Andrew Tate conserving? One, he's a Muslim who is anti-West, and that actually ties in with kind of a more wokist approach. And he's trying to uproot much of tradition of monogamy, of living a virtuous life. So when people look at him, he's the embodiment of liberalism. He is a liberal, but he's posturing as a conservatism. So it's also young men have a warped perception of conservatism, where they somehow believe that having multiple wives or sleeping around is somehow now traditional, or like it's incredible that like we have a generation of men who have a completely warped perception of tradition. And because my granddad, for instance, when he was alive, like the way he treated my gran or lived, like there were many, tradition, like even just little things like opening a door for someone, or there's little things that is tradition. But Andrew Tate says stuff like, he won't do something if a girl's ugly and stuff like that. I mean, that's not tradition. That's just liberalism.
Well, it's pretty disgusting, actually. If from my point of view, when you treat people with disdain, and you speak about treating people that way, I mean, I don't really have time for Andrew Tate. And, I was brought up in the old school of being a gentleman. And for me, the ultimate stance for any man and the ultimate aim is to model yourself on being a gentleman, on being, if you look at the old days, in the 50s, those men who we now have forgotten and don't regard highly. There is a behaviour where if you want to behave like Andrew Tate, and you want to behave in a way which is posturing and trying to show. I didn't realise he was a Muslim. Is he Muslim?
Yeah, he's big Muslim. There's loads of young men are becoming Muslim.
Yeah, and I'm not going to.
And I'm not anti-Muslim, just to make that clear. But the reason I say that is because the reason he's doing that is not. I'm not going to deny anyone's religion. If he says Muslim, he's Muslim. But I would argue that there's a possibility he's doing that because majority of countries around the world that are Muslim are incredibly sexist. There is a culture. There is an issue of sexism within Islam. That's not to say that all Muslims are sexist. There's loads of brilliant things they do. They honour women, less objectification, but there is definitely an issue with kind of the rights of women in Islam. And and Andrew Tate loves it because it's kind of authoritarian, it's theocratic, it's like he's praised Saudi Arabia, he's refused to condemn the Taliban, ISIS. Like he loves the strong man. He loves his version of God is you are terrified of God, and being God-fearing is obviously an important part of religion, but for him, like faith is about rules, not in the sense of like following it to be virtuous, but it's about ticking a box. It's about that's what he's about, and that's why I think young men are being drawn to it, because it's like it's this black and white, it's this.
Can I just say, while you're talking, what occurs to me was we just said a little bit of knowledge is a bad thing.
Yeah.
And here, in my opinion, is someone who has a little bit of knowledge and has expounded a view without really thinking it through. And I think that reflects Andrew Tate perfectly. And I'm not trying to deny or decry his faith. I'm definitely not doing
Same.
that. I'm not doing that. But what I'm saying is that if someone proclaims a faith and then talks like that, I don't think he's doing that faith any favours. I really don't. And, if he sees a wrathful God, then he's missing the point completely. He's misunderstanding what it is to be a God-fearing person. And it's interesting. I thought you were excellent the way you said that, he a lot of people would think he's conservative, but he's inverted it. He really has. And how do we correct that thinking? How do we correct the thinking of so many young men who now hold up Andrew Tate to be the epitome of what a man is? And I would challenge that. I really would challenge that. Some of the strongest men are the quietest and not that vainglorious, gobby, mouthy individual. I would never dream of saying some of the things he said, and I'm embarrassed about it. I actually feel kind of like sick, just listening to some of the stuff he says. This is the society we live in. We live in a society where people are now impressed by that. So again, have we gone too far down the progressive route, where I always applaud freedom of expression, but freedom of expression has got to be within the context of moral boundaries. And when you push those moral boundaries where people, and this is what worries me, see, this is the crux of what we're discussing. How are moral boundaries set? And when do we know that those boundaries have been pushed to the point that they have, reached that decadence, that we feel disgust for the behaviours that are going on? I remember as a kid, if you saw a naked woman on TV or something along those lines, you'd be kind of embarrassed about it. Okay, and now nakedness and sexualization. I've been watching Vikings again, the series.
Yeah.
Okay, just got into it, and
have you seen The Last Kingdom?
Oh, I love that. I love it. I love it.
The new series are really...
They're great. They're great.
I don't know, the new series, they went off a cliff. The old one's fantastic.
Oh, absolutely, because they reflected some real truths,
Yeah.
And it's very interesting the way male and female relationships are portrayed.
I love the weddings in Last Kingdom. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And what do they do? They get I'm trying to remember, they bind.
Yeah, that's it.
So
I mean, these old traditions, again, these old-fashioned traditions were symbolic and were very beautiful. But I've been watching Vikings, and that, I forgot my train of thought on that, actually, sorry.
Classic.
That's all right, don't worry, it's usual. This is why we have these conversations and when we discuss so many different things. But I think the point I wanted to make about Vikings was that there was a sort of masculinity and femininity that was portrayed. Now, that's what I was going to say. We're talking about sexualization, weren't we? Okay. Last Kingdom, Vikings, Game of Thrones, right? Some great series. The only issue is, especially with Vikings and Game of Thrones, was how many sexual scenes were there in that. Okay. Now, again, I'm going to sound like a prude. God gave us the most sacred and beautiful thing, which is sex. It is a sacred behavior, okay? And it's been corrupted. And some people might laugh at me and say, oh, he's called sex sacred. Well, actually, the original basis of sex between a man and a woman was that conjugation, that love. You were meant to make love to that person, and out of that love was born a child, okay? That is the ultimate in it. And obviously, because it is something that is so pleasing, like sugar, like anything that is pleasurable, it gets demonized. It gets twisted.
Yeah.
Okay? So we now live in a world where the sexualization of ourselves has reached a point where you can't seem to watch a film anymore without not just sex with two people lying on top of each other, but it's almost become soft porn. I mean, Game of Thrones, I loved it, but oh my God, if you wanted to see soft porn, and I mean, even Vikings, I've been watching some of the latter series.
Last Kingdom, some...
Yeah,
I mean,
again,
it's a bit
some
more,
raunchy stuff.
bit more moderate, some scenes.
In context, I get it. I get the Vikings were slightly animalistic the way they behaved, and I think you can put that in context. I think the film that really disappointed me was there was a film made about Mary Anning. I think that's her name. The lady who was the founder of digging up fossils. Sorry, I'm forgetting the language of it. The words for it. people who dig up fossils. She was
archaeologist.
No, there's another word for it. It'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, she was very famous. She lived in Lyme Regis, and she was the first person to, fossils were falling out the cliff, and she used to pick these fossils up and sell them in her shop. And then, anyway, she became famous as the mother of fossils and that particular science, paleontology. That's what I'm trying to think of. I was so pleased that they'd made a film about her, because I'd heard a lot about her, and I was fascinated to hear about this woman. And so I put the film on, and it seemed like a lovely family film, a historical film about this amazing woman. And within a very short space of time, they introduced a female character into this film. And then, without any warning, there was this full-on lesbian sex scene, which left nothing to the imagination, in the middle of this kind of historic story. And I just felt so sorry for families who'd sat down to watch this. Can you imagine watching it with a young kid?
Yeah.
And funnily enough, I was talking to this girl who was a paleontologist, funny enough, and I said, "Oh, did you see the Mary Anning film?" And she goes, "Yeah, it was so upsetting." And it turned out that, the director had decided, because he's a progressive,
right,
that this was needed to be shown. So again, sexualization, it's in your face, wherever you go, whatever you watch, and it's there.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And everything is so normal, sexualized. And one thing I've read from C.S. Lewis' book on Christianity, he made a brilliant point where he said, there's nothing more you can give to someone than sex. People can run away, they can act like sex is nothing, but the truth is, we came into this world with nothing. Our human bodies, something we don't control, which we are, our skin and flesh. There is nothing you can do more to someone than to share your body with someone. You cannot give anything more. There's nothing more in the sense, and I'm not talking about like actions, but I'm saying as a raw human specimen, when you are making love to someone, that is the ultimate act, because there is nothing more you can show yourself and make them feel than what you are doing and the action of it. That there's not a grain that of anything that you can give more to that person. It's the ultimate giving. Like if you want to talk about kind of love and like what can you give more to someone than having sex with them? There's nothing, because that's just you. There's no more you than your naked self with someone else's naked self. You are like, it's like, I don't know, it's something so magical and something so beautiful, but it's that, and what you said about the corruption of it, and it's so sad that beauty of your naked body with someone else's naked body, and just you're letting go, you are just yourself.
But can I say, Rory, I've said this to you before, that the act of sexual intercourse is actually marriage. The word marry is for two things to come together. So when you marry something together, you bring two bits of paper together, you marry them up. That's a term that's used when you push something together. So the act of sex is the marriage act. People misunderstand this. They think the ceremony of getting married is marriage. It's not. The ceremony is the precursor to the act of marriage, which is sex, which is why it was so abhorrent to many Christians that when gay people talked about marriage, it was frowned upon, because marriage means sex between a man and a woman, using parts of your body that are designed for reproduction. And the whole point of marriage was that two people came together to bring forth children, not to have a pleasurable time and stick bits into places that maybe they weren't designed to have stuck in. Sorry, I'm getting.
I mean, I think I get what you mean. I think that's another in the sense, like, same sex marriage. That could be another interesting.
The point I'm making, I'm not decrying or knocking it. Personally, I have my own opinion, which I'm not going to express. But the view I'm making is that the sexual act is an act, a beautiful act that's meant to be carried out by a man and a woman, in order to bring about a child.
Well, what if they can't have kids?
Then they are welcome to have sex,
right,
and enjoy that sex. I mean, the Book of Solomon. Have you read the Song of Solomon?
No.
It is the most soft porn you could. It's in the Bible.
Really?
You read it.
Wow.
Read it. He describes a woman's breasts as like two doves, and he uses old-fashioned language to, to describe things.
Yeah.
But the Song of Solomon is a book on love.
Wow.
And Solomon had, I don't know, umpteen.
Maybe I have read it. I don't know.
It's not one of those books that many people read.
I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's an Old Testament. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just saying there was a beauty to these things. Okay, and anyway, I think I want to just bring something else in about conservatism, and this is about manners. It's just occurred to me that
manners make a man.
Manners maketh the man. Yeah. Now, what a lovely conservative thing to say. And someone once said, "Oh, manners are there to make you feel awkward." Someone once said, posh people eat a certain way, and posh people behave a certain way, because they're brought up with manners. And if you don't have manners, then why is that bloke behaving and eating like that? Does he think he's better than me or something? And again, for me, if you were to look at the conservative approach, having good manners is something that is very important, because what manners do is they're designed to make sure that your behaviour is compatible with your people around you, so that they don't find you offensive. So if I was served a beautiful plate of food and I started eating it with my hands, okay, people are going to be a little bit awkward, and they're not going to enjoy their food because I'm making a spectacle eating my things. Likewise, if you're eating your food in a way that's not particularly enticing to other people, but if you eat it neatly in a lovely way and you're eating properly, it's a very simple thing. It's always in the detail. It's a simple way of behaviour that puts other people at and like saying thank you, please and thank you. Now, I wonder how many people actually. I've heard someone say, don't say sorry, don't apologise, please and thank you are kind of old-fashioned. And for me, that's the epitome. It's the oil that lubricates society so that we don't rub up against each other in a rough way, which will cause difficulty. And that is something which I think is quite conservative as well. It's a behaviour. How do you carry yourself? How do you behave with other people? Do you make other people feel comfortable in your company? Or do you just think that it's their problem if they don't feel comfortable with you, it's their problem?
Yeah, I think that's powerful, because it's something that everyone can relate to. So no one's parents are telling their kids, right, be rude. No one in their right mind saying that. No one's.
But they're not teaching them.
Yeah, and that's the issue. And with it, that everyone, whether they like it or not, has many aspects of their lives that are built upon things that came before them. And that's what the younger generation, and kind of lean on to what I want us to talk about, which is what can we actually do as young people, and what can we do as a society to bring back conservatism. I would say it's an acknowledgement of past times and the knowledge we can learn from it. And it's interesting because the stuff we talk about, it all interlinks with each other, but it's about also secularism within the West, of how it's uprooting tradition, it's uprooting what's before. Like, why even be inquisitive of the Bible when you have no respect for past culture, past times, past wisdom? Why even bother looking at it? There's not a inclination when there's an active dislike and disdain for conservatism. And also, I think it's a very because as a young person, when you grow up, you're very lost. Like, what do you follow? What do you do? The simplest thing you can do is look at what works and then maybe incorporate that and see how it goes. And part of that is, and one of the struggles I think for young people now is there isn't anything to really lean upon and say, oh, right, that's direction. And I come across people all the time who say to me stuff like they didn't know they could think that, or they didn't know they could believe this, or because there's no one kind of they can lean on for that knowledge, for that way of preserving things. And when I think about what my generation are preserving, what are my generation preserving? They're preserving nothing, and that's the scary thing. And that's why, as a young person, I feel a duty for my children in the future of the type of culture they're going to inherit, because it's the culture they inherit will be the one that we make and we decide. And like even today, for instance, there was in Manchester. I mean, these are just like be like, I don't want to use the word satanic, that I wouldn't go as that far, but these are appalling scenes. It was a pro-life meeting, so just a bunch of young people, a bunch of young students met just to talk about, you know, pro-life issues, and they were mobbed outside by a group of people. There was a fist fight. They were shouted at, all these people, and it was just phenomenal, because here we are, a British university where some people just met to talk about maybe record abortions, maybe them potentially making it, decriminalising abortion up till birth, being assaulted, being screamed at by a bunch of people who have nothing better to do on their night than to seriously attack people who are for life. And how far have we fallen when this is the scenes in Manchester? And it goes on to the notion of conservatism, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, and people who are even liberal, I think in your generation who I speak to, they don't even realise how fucked up we've got to. Like, even with abortion, it used to be safe, legal, rare. That was kind of a common thing. It's not good, sometimes happens, people get raped, things happen, the complicated situations. That was kind of a consensus. It's not good, but it does happen. Now it's literal pro-death, it's pro-abortion, people denying that a baby in the womb is even a life, like, until it comes out. It's just beyond abhorrent things. I don't want to go into whole abortion.
Mate, that is satanic. It is. Yeah. It is. You know, you're right. And the problem is that, you know, there is a corruption within as well. There's a rottenness. It's interesting you used the word earlier on about preserving. You wanted to preserve, and funnily enough, the English word for a jam is preserve. You know, it's if you look at the old labels, it's a preserve, conserve, preserve. In both cases, it's referring to stopping rottenness, and what you've just described is pure rottenness at its worst. Okay, that I was just thinking about this, the whole concept of debate. Okay, having a conversation and respecting one's opponent and accepting that they have a view. Okay, and we're not allowed to have views. We have to be right or wrong, okay? And this is where the culture is beginning to rot. And this is why, you know, conservative with a small c, and it worries me, but, you know, it's a shame that a political party has used this term, doesn't it? Because it totally bastardizes the term conservative. As soon as I say conservative, I'm a conservative in my behaviour. I like blue. I'm wearing blue. But I'm a conservative, a Christian conservative. Okay. But if I say that, oh my Lord, what's going to come back at me?
You're a nutcase.
I'm a nutcase, aren't I? You know, killer, the punchatory. You know, all this kind of thing all comes out. But what I'm saying is that I have a very traditional view on marriage, on life, on behaviour, and I would like to think that most right-thinking people would agree with me and, you know, try to aim at excellence in our behaviour with each other. And I think that's the ultimate aim in conservatism. And what you're talking about, I mean, I'm you know, abortion is a topic which is...
will do an I think we'll do it.
I think we need to bring that up because there's something deeply disturbing.
Record abortions as well. It's not going away. Like, it's not like we're plucking this out thin air. It's only getting worse as well.
Yeah, and I mean, and the thing is, you know, you've got ways of stopping getting pregnant. You know, this is what I can't understand. You've got the pill. You've got so many different things, and yet they're choosing to kill a baby. Anyway, I'm not going to go there because that's just going to disappoint.
Yeah, and also, well, a bit of nuance to that as well. I will just add, like, when I talk about that, I'm never shaming or attacking women in that sense. I'm just saying it's sad that as a culture, that's where we're at. As a kind of macro, I'm not. You know, if someone's listening who's had an abortion, like, I mourn for you and I feel for you, and I hope God's with you completely. So I guess moving forward, because we did this last time on a positive note, what can we do? What can we do as a culture to bring conservatism back into our culture, into young people, to inspire, to make them think that, like, dismantling everything won't lead to happiness, and it clear as day is not. What can we do you think, Steve?
we have to turn to God, in my opinion. Now, Richard, is it? I'm having a bit of a mental. Russell Brand. I was shocked recently. Now, I've never really liked Russell Brand. I've always found him gobby, and in the early days, I just found him a pain in the arse. I really did. He's really super smart, and I'm wondering whether he's on cocaine because he talks so quickly. But look, he's a smart guy. I recently saw a video, and he is actively promoting Christianity. And, he met with Jordan Peterson, and I think that rocked his boat more than anything else. And Jordan Peterson is a deep Christian. And obviously he instilled in Russell Brand this desire for Christianity. And if you've seen the videos that Russell Brand is now posting, he is... I'm amazed. This is a turnaround. This is a complete turnaround. And what gives me hope is that if someone like Russell Brand, and to be honest, I was disgusted the way he was treated. All right, everybody should be forgiven their past, but when you dredge up someone's past because they are saying things publicly that the government don't want to be said, and then you throw that crap at them in order to make the brainless public who will believe that hate him more. I was totally against that. Totally against it. I think that was really disgusting.
I think
what happened. Yeah,
I mean the motivations were grim because the reason that was done was because he was obviously an anti-establishment figure. We won't go into kind of the specifics of that. So
I'd love to.
We will definitely disagree. Disagree with you there. But.
Okay, but the bottom line is Russell Brand is now talking about Christianity in a very positive way, and he was actually waving a book. It's really bizarre. He's sitting on this funny little toy, and he's waving this book around. And he says this book is called The Prodigal Son, and it was a study on the story of the prodigal son, which Jesus talked about. And if ever there was a prodigal son, I think Russell Brand.
Yeah, that is a very good point.
And so what you're saying is, how does society change? Well, it changes when the prodigals realise what they've done wrong. And when will that happen? And on what level will that happen? So I've got it, again, I prepared. Can you believe that? I prepared for this, and I've got on my phone a copy, if I can get my phone to work, a copy of The Prodigal Son, which may I read to you?
Yeah.
So my phone is on low power, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to, again, I don't have my glasses on. So this is a little bit long. So do you mind if I read this? Yeah. Are you happy with this? Yeah. Okay, cool. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to the father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them, his younger son and older son. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, I'm just repeating that, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went back to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and sinned against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servant, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine who was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we have to celebrate and be glad, because the brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found."
Wow. I mean, it really is a beautiful... It's the encapsulation of Christianity in a story. It's when you're at rock bottom, when everything should mean that you're undeserving of love, but you are loved anyway. That right there sums up the Christian ethos, values, and what
forgiveness.
And it's something so moving, because anyone would look at that. A lot of people look at that and be like, "Well, he didn't deserve. Well, he didn't this." But the whole point of Christianity is that's irrelevant. Like, he was lost and now he's found, and it's such a powerful message, especially to people who feel bad about themselves or have done acts they regret or things they're shameful of, that you are loved and there is change and God loves you, and like in the story, like, he will welcome you in and hug you, and it's accepting God's love, which is, I think, about Christianity. It's not. It's easy to get wrapped up in other things, isn't it? But wow.
Yeah. So the interesting word that's used that's not fashionable is sin. I sinned against heaven and against you. I'm a sinner. People hate that word. You can't call yourself a sinner. You can't do that anymore. What is a sinner? What is it to sin? To sin is to go against God, to go against the conservative received wisdom of what is right and what is wrong. When you sin, you cross that moral boundary. When you sin, you do things that are destructive to other people. When you sin, you cause harm not only to yourself, but to others and the world around you. And what is happening now? But people do not. This is what's really weird. If you say to someone, "Do not sin," whoa, what kind of reaction? "You calling me a sinner? You calling me a sinner?" Yeah, your behaviour is sinful. It's a word that is so sharp. It cuts. It really cuts. It cuts so deep that people object to using that word on themselves. I will use that word on myself. I am a sinner. I have got things wrong in my life. I have been in a situation where, I have been like that boy, that man who left his father. And you asked me, what can we do? How can we bring this back? And I said, you turn to God. Return to God. Return to the Father. And the Father, if you return with a contrite heart of forgiveness and saying, "Sorry, I have behaved badly," he will forgive you. God will forgive and forgive and forgive and forgive, and he will continue to forgive.
And he will never abandon you.
And he will never abandon you. Like the Father in that story, at whatever level of depravity you have plumbed the depths of, always remember that Jesus, through Jesus, that's his story. Jesus told that story. Through that story, he is telling you that because he died on the cross, you can now be forgiven. Your sins, your behaviors that you're not proud of, and the things you've done wrong can be forgiven. And that salvation is open to every single person.
Mm.
And so, you need to find that place in your heart to not only forgive others, but in some cases you need to forgive yourself. That's a very difficult thing. People don't even think about that. When I've not done anything wrong. Well, look at it. Look at yourself. I want to bring this up. Someone asked me, I watched this thing recently, and this guy said, who are you? Who are you? So, Rory, who are you?
That's a deep question, but
okay, just who are you?
I'm Rory, part of the Jacobs family.
Okay, stop there. Why are you Rory?
Because
you were given that name.
Yeah, I was given that name.
You were given that name.
Yeah.
Think. Just think.
Yeah.
Just think.
Wow.
Think. Wow. Who? See, and this is what's wrong with our thinking. We are so superficial in our thinking that we go through life with this blasé approach. Oh, I'm Steve Gomez. Who are you? I'm Steve Gomez. Who am I?
That is incredible.
Who am I? Yeah. Remember when God was asked by Moses, who are you? He said, I am who I am. Okay. Being is who you are. You are a being. But who are you? And when you start to think really hard on who are you, it starts to make you think, what am I? Where have I come? Why am I here? My hands, are these my hands? This is my body. What is this body? Where is it? And how many of us have even stopped to think? And I would venture a little thought that you are the product of a creator God who created a world and populated it with people who he created. He created you, he created me. And okay, although, we were born to a mother, that is, and animals are born and, it's not just humans, but we're born with cognizance. There's something so that we can ask these questions. Mm. And when you start to dig in deep, who are you? I think that helps you find a place in the world where you can feel comfortable. But in order to find that comfort, you have to understand one thing, that when you were created, there was a hole placed within you. Okay? That hole is in the shape of God. But God didn't fill it because the most important thing he gave us was choice, freedom of will. Mm. So he said, there is this thing within you which I've designed, but I'm not going to fill it because I want you to invite me in. I want you to get to know me, and then you will be complete. But what do people do? They fill that place of love, which is pure, godly love, a relationship with the Father, Creator. They fill it with all sorts of things that make them feel better. Mm. Sex, drugs, alcohol, whatever. And they think that they're complete. The number of people who do these crazy things to make themselves feel complete, okay, and yet they're not complete. So what I'm saying is, if you want to return to God, and the only way we're going to solve our society is that we have to come back to who we are, know who we are, and understand that connection with the Father.
Very powerful, so powerful. It got me thinking about how, like, really knowing the we are a vessel of our soul, in the sense of we have these thoughts in our head. We think about life. We think about this, and we're the kind of input. We're the output to our brain. So when we're walking about, we're having all these thoughts about us, about who am I, Rory? Who is Steve? Who am I, Steve? Who's Rory? But it's like, oh my goodness, we're just a consciousness thinking about that. We we came from a ball sack, you know, like we were once
sperms and eggs.
To think about, we were one time a literal sperm in a body. Yeah. I mean, to really think about that, to think we were literally swimming in a body.
Yeah,
like
half of us was.
Yeah, like
sort of. Yeah. The genetic bit from our father was.
Yeah. But to think about us, we lived through a body. We swam through a body, and we have a soul. We have things we think about, but our output is just our body. It's just what we're doing with it.
It brings us back to what we talked about abortion. Okay. So there is this argument. At what point?
Should we say this for another? I think
I will. I'm just qualifying what you're saying. I'm just qualifying what you're saying is a precursor to having that conversation. But what I'm saying to you is that, you know, you're talking about conception. Okay, the conceiving of a human being, where the sperm and the egg come together, and you know the mitosis happens, and this little clump of cells. You know, at what point does that clump of cells become knowing? Okay. Anyway, like you said, save that for another time.
We definitely will. But it's we're finishing off of this episode about conservatism. So we've talked about what it is, what like the values of conservatism. We've spoke about specifics. There are certain avenues we could have gone to, but I think it's such a broad topic.
It is,
and we could talk about, and we might do another episode on this. Who knows about conservatism within Europe? What does that look like? What is happening? Because we are seeing a serious pushback against that in an extreme respect, which is a bit scary. And we can talk really about what the future looks politically within that, maybe. And we talked about what we can learn from it, what we can do. And within what we can do, I would say that just speak to older people and learn from older people, because I'm the third child, so I'm blessed. So I've seen the mistakes my brother and sister have done. I've learned from that. I've learned, like, obviously I've made loads of mistakes as well. And I speak to older people, and it really is very good. And I'm very blessed that I got into the working world, and I was speaking to older people way above my age not from an early age, like I was working at 2 years old, but like when I was kind of clueless in the world, I was speaking to older people, and that always gave me a steering direction in the madness of the world, which I've always been blessed with, and I've learned a lot from my gran and my dad and my mum and, you know, people in my life. And I would just say to anyone out there who's like baffled, do hang out with older people, because it takes the edge off of actually your identity, because you can learn, you can create a new identity.
Can I add a caveat?
Yeah.
Can I just add a caveat? Be selective of the older people you hang out with.
Very true.
I just want to say that not all people have learned from their mistakes.
True. True.
So when you know, it's about mentoring, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I think all young men and young women, I believe, should have a mentor and should have someone who they look up to as a role model. But be careful of who that role model is. You know, I'm not perfect. I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm happy to say that. And if you ever meet someone who says they haven't made any mistakes and is prideful, maybe give them
be careful.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone who can't point out mistakes themselves, big red flag, in the sense of just like not
ask them if they're a sinner. Ask them if they're a sinner.
Yeah, good one.
Go on. Yeah, you're a sinner.
Because you have, like, we all are. Like, I love Jordan Peterson. He speaks about how we're all such kind of devious creatures with loads of wrongdoings, and as you unveil that, you see that, and kind of if people aren't aware of it, then they are that thing, almost the most incarnate version. I mean, I'm not saying that people who aren't aware of their own Christians are some sort of demons, but I'm saying it's an important thing to have, because whenever you think you're above that, then you really have a problem. You do have to analyse it. And I'm a culprit of this. We're all culprits of it. We're not perfect. We're not saying we're perfect, but there's some things we can talk about here, and we can, I think, give some decent advice on certain issues. And I really hope that some of the stuff we talk about on this show does help and bring some value to people. But it's been a brilliant episode.
Yeah, and I just want to say, if anybody does want to talk about anything, I'm seriously, I'm very happy to talk about anything you're worried about in regard to your life and anything else. So there's an offer there. Should we finish with a prayer?
Yeah.
It being Sunday. So I'm going to keep it short this time because the prayer that came into my head is the Lord's Prayer. And I think it covers a lot of what we've spoken about. So I'm just going to say this, and feel free, if you're listening to this, to quietly say it to yourself, if you feel off a mind. But when you say it, think really about the words and think, because this is the prayer that Jesus taught us and how we pray. And, we don't pray shouting out to everybody to see how holy we are. We should close the door and pray on our own. So without further ado, I'll finish off by saying the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, as we have sinned against others. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Beautiful. And yes, we're sorry to not officially have done that, but I hope you have all enjoyed the episode. Yep. I really do. And do share this with a friend or family member, someone who is interested in these, someone who's very progressive, be like, I found this interesting, it's about conservatism, you might be a different outlet. Send it to him, send it to a friend, send it to a family member, put it in the group chat, share it about, put it in your story, tag us, all that good stuff, because it is the only way the show grows. And it means, I can't tell you how much it means. It really means a lot. Giving you a virtual hug if you're one of those people who actually goes out and shares it. I mean, what a fucking legend. But thank you so much for listening. I absolutely love every single one of you. If you are listening on iTunes, please leave us a rating. It would mean so much. And thank you to everyone who has left a rating. We've had a few ratings, but there haven't been ratings with comments, which is fine. But if you have some comments to say, whether it be good or bad, please do leave them in the description. And thank you all so much for listening on this beautiful Sunday morning. I'm happy that you could be with us. I hope this has brought you some joy, some insight, something that you don't usually get. Maybe you don't have a friend you can talk to, your dad, your mum. Maybe you don't have a dad or mum. Like you, in your life, you can't have these conversations. There's no one you can have these conversations with. I hope that we can be that person. You can hear insight and get thinking about certain things you wouldn't think about before, because that's what life's about. There's things I stumble across that get me thinking about things I've never, I don't have a clue about, or I'm absolutely like bamboozled, or I'm in awe. Like everyone in life, everyone stumbles across things and they're like, oh my goodness, look how incredible this is. So this could just be one of those things for you. And thank you for giving your time. It means so much. The fact that so many people tuned into the first episode. I mean, bloody hell, I can't even begin. I was absolutely stunned. And the thing that really got me was when I published it and I saw straight away people were listening to it. I was like, blimey, there were literally people waiting for 9 o'clock. And that brought me so much joy. And the movement and what we're doing on this podcast, I know it's been a long journey we've been going over two years, and we're going to go a lot longer, because this is a movement, this is a community, the incredible people who listen to this show week in, week out. I really, really do adore all of you, and I really hope this has been great. But thanks so much, Steve, for coming on. This is the number 2 of Incite, the new show every Sunday. But I will catch you all this Thursday at 6 o'clock for the weekly political show, or if you want the Sunday sermon, if you want to call it that, to wake up your Sunday morning with me and Steve, then I will see you next Sunday at 9 o'clock. It's a bye from me.
And it's a goodbye from me.
Peace.
Misrepresented.